Alrighty, mathematicians, we are in Algebra 1. Today, we are learning how to factor completely, all right? That's the big goal, all right? So first things first, let's go ahead, let's do a little bit of review of factoring, all right? And remember, this method of factoring is using the box and diamond. I may have another video showing you a shorter way, but a more thought-worthy way, I suppose. So let's go ahead and first start by drawing our box and diamond, all right? So we're going to draw a box just like this. Remember drawing the box so that way you can put numbers on the inside and on the outside. Big enough that they fit on the inside and small enough that you can put numbers on the outside. Then we're going to draw a diamond, which is pretty much an X, right? All right. Now, again, the setup, right? This is the setup for all factoring trinomial. Remember, trinomial means three terms, right? So those three. So the first one goes in the first box. The last one goes in the last box. Middle goes in the bottom of the diamond. And then you are going to multiply the first and the third to get this top of the diamond, all right? Make sure that you are paying attention to signs, right? So notice there's negative 12. Well, that's negative 12. X squared times negative 12, negative 12x squared, right? And that is the setup, all right? And again, we learned this already, and so hopefully by now you're pretty good at the setup, all right? Shouldn't take you too long. Now remember, a diamond problem, how it works, it needs to multiply to the top number, but add to the bottom. So we're thinking what multiplies to negative 12, but adds to 4. Well, that is going to be positive 6x and negative 2, right? And let's think about this. So 6 times negative 2 would give us negative 12. And 6 minus 2 would be 4, right? So that's how we know we did it correctly, all right? So now we're going to put those corners, again, I call these the corners, into the corners. So we're going to put a 6x here, negative 2x there, and now we are thinking, what can we divide out? Remember, you can use your factor chart to help you think about this, but what can we divide out of 6x and negative 12? Well, you could divide out a 6. Looking at the top row, so x squared and negative 2x, we could divide an x. Going up, well, x squared and 6x, we could divide out an x. And then our last one, negative 2x and negative 12. Again, this is negative, so we're going to bring out a negative, and then it is going to be 2. So then we can go ahead and write our answer, which is x plus 6, x minus 2. Done, right? So again, the whole thing is that this right here, this trinomial, is the exact same thing as these two binomials being multiplied together. All right, that is the whole goal of factoring, okay? So again, that was one review, all right? So go ahead. What I want you to do now is I want you guys to practice these two, all right? We'll go for about 4 minutes here or whatnot, and then I am going to fly through it. So go ahead, pause the video, and then when you come back, we'll do it together. All right, and we are back. So again, draw a box, draw a diamond. Have the setup, so we're going to do 6x squared, 1, 5x goes here, and then you multiply the first and the third, so it's going to be 6x squared in the top. Boom. That is a setup, should be just about that fast, okay? So then we're thinking, okay, what multiplies to 6x squared, but adds to 5x? Again, multiplies to the top, adds to the bottom. This is going to be 3x and 2x, right? So put those corners in the corners, and now we're thinking what numbers go where. All right, so dividing here, 3x and 1 have nothing in common, so you put a 1. 6x squared and 2x, well, they both can be divisible by 2 and an x, right? Because, again, 6 and 2 are both divisible by 2, and then there's both have an x. Going up, well, 6 and 3, well, we could divide both those by 3, and then they both have an x. And then 2 and 1, they have nothing in common, so it would be a 1. Go ahead and write your answer just like this. 3x plus 1, 2x plus 1. And there you go. It's that easy, okay? So, and then our last one, again, we're going to go really quickly here. So you draw your box, draw your diamond, and now time for the setup, right? So we have our first one goes in the first box, last one goes in the last box. Make sure you know that it's a negative 2. Middle goes in the bottom of the diamond. Again, make sure it's negative. Multiply these two, the first and the last. So that's going to be negative 6x squared. Perfect. And again, that is the setup. By now, this should take you about 10 seconds, okay? It shouldn't take you very, very long, okay? So now we're thinking, again, what multiplies to the top, so negative 6x squared, but adds to negative 5x. Now, you may look at this one and say, oh, well, 2 and 3. But the problem is 2 and 3 do not multiply to negative 6 and add to negative 5. Instead, we're going to have to use a different combination. So we're actually going to use negative 6x and positive 1x, right? Again, negative 6 times 1 is going to be negative 6, and negative 6 plus 1 is going to be negative 5. That's how we know. So negative 6x goes here, 1x goes there, and now it's time to divide out. Going out the bottom row here, we have negative 6 and negative 2. Notice they're both negative. That tells us that this one should be negative because this is negative. And we can divide out a negative 2. Going out this top row, we have 3x squared and 1x. Well, we could divide both these by an x. Okay, going up 3x squared and negative 6x, we could take out a 3 and an x, right? Because again, both were divisible by 3, and then they also both have an x. And then our last one, well, 1 and negative 2 have nothing in common, so we're going to put a 1. Final answer then would be 3x plus 1 and x minus 2. Again, signs are very, very important, guys, right? Notice, look, this minus 2, make sure it's in there, right? And then this one, since there is no sign, well, we know it's a positive. All right, so again, that is a little bit of our factoring review, all right? So now what I need you to know is I need you to know that order matters, okay? So everything that we factor should go in this kind of way. It should have something like ax squared. The a just represents any number, right? So it should be any number and then ax squared, okay? And then we're going to be adding or subtracting, doesn't really matter, our b term, which is bx, and then we're going to be adding our c. And you guys can kind of see this in our examples up here, right? Notice it goes x squared, x, no x. X squared, x, no x, right? And that's how it should go. X squared, x, no x. And so if you look here, well, this one doesn't, because look, this one has only 2 terms, right? So it goes x squared. We are missing our x, and then you have a c term, that minus 4 is going to be our c. So what we should do is we should rewrite this. We should rewrite it as 9x squared, because there's our x term, or our x squared term, I'm sorry. And then we're going to write plus 0x. This is going to act as a placeholder, right? This is going to act as a placeholder in order to get our 3 spots, because now we can factor that, all right? So we can go ahead and factor that. Yeah, go ahead, take 10 seconds, set up the problem, go ahead, do this now. Okay, so the setup should look like this. You draw a box, you draw a diamond. Now, again, first one goes in the first box, last one goes in the last box, middle goes in the bottom of the diamond, and then you're going to multiply these two right here. So then, well, 9 times 4, well, this is going to give us negative 36x squared. Again, the setup for all these trinomials is always going to be the same. So that is how we know we're doing it right, is just follow that pattern, right? Okay, so now let's think about this. What multiplies to negative 36x squared but adds to 0? Well, let's think about this. If it adds to 0, these two numbers have to be the same number, except for one of them is going to be positive, one of them is going to be negative. And, well, what number multiplies to 36? Well, 6 and 6. So this is going to be 6x and negative 6x. Put those corners in the corners. One of them is positive, one of them is negative, and then we're going to go ahead and divide out. Dividing out the bottom here, well, notice negative 6x and negative 4, you could divide out a negative 2. Okay, looking at this one right here, 9x squared and 6x. Well, 9 and 6 are both divisible by 3, and then there is an x. Going up the columns, so 9x squared and negative 6x, we could divide both of these by 3x. And then last but not least, we have 6x and negative 4. We could divide both of these by 2. Again, notice this one, the closest to the number that you pull out or factor out is negative, so you factor out a negative. This one's positive, so you factor out a positive. All right, answer looks like this. 3x plus 2, 3x minus 2. There we go. All right, so again, pretty much it's the exact same thing. It's just we need to kind of think how this works, right? So notice here, again, order matters, right? So it should go x squared, x, no x, right? So notice this is all shuffled around, right? And so we need to rewrite it. So we need to write x squared. The first one goes there, right? So it's positive, so just like that. Okay, then we're going to write minus 11x, and then, again, x squared, then x, then no x. So then a plus 28 goes out there. Okay, so again, take about 10 seconds. Actually, I think you can factor the whole thing, all right? So go ahead, factor the whole thing. When you're back, we're going to fly through this example. Go ahead, do this now. Okay, we're back, so we're going to go ahead and draw a diamond and a box. The first one goes in the first box. Last one goes in the last box. Middle goes in the bottom of the diamond, right? And again, by now you're getting really, really good at this. You multiply the first and last, so you get 28x squared. Again, you're thinking, what things multiply to 28x squared but add to negative 11? Well, let's think. Multiply to 28, 7, and 4. Oh, okay, so we have 7x and 4x. The only thing is they both need to be negative because two negatives make a positive, and when you're adding two negatives, make them more negative. There you go. So we got negative 7x here, negative 4x here, and now we're going to divide out. What can we divide here? Well, that's going to be a negative 7. X squared and negative 4x, well, we could take out an x going up. X squared and negative 7x, we're going to take out an x, and then last but not least, we have negative 4x and 28. This is going to be negative 4. Final answer looks like this. X minus 7, x minus 4. Again, I went through that really, really fast. So if you need to go back and check your answer, please do so, right? Like go back and watch all of the work. All right, so again, this one, start from scratch. Again, you need to rearrange it in the correct order. So go ahead, take about 10 seconds here, rearrange it in the correct order. All right, so this should look like this. 8k squared minus 10k plus 3. Again, what we did was we wrote it in the correct order. So now go ahead and factor this. Now that, again, make sure that yours matches mine, right? Again, that 3 is positive because it's not negative. 10 is negative because there's a negative sign in front. So go ahead and factor this now. All right, let's go ahead and do this quickly. So we have our box. We have a diamond. Make that a little nicer. And there we go. So first one goes in the first box. Ooh, I always want to do an X, not a K. First one goes in the first box. Last one goes in the last box. Middle goes in the bottom of the diamond. Then again, we're multiplying the first and the third. So this is going to be 24k squared. Perfect. Thinking of what things multiply to 24k squared but add to negative 10x. Well, 24, 6 and 4, right? 6k, I'm sorry, 6k and 4k. Again, we have to make both of them negative because two negatives make a positive and two negatives make more negative there. All right, so then this is going to be negative 6k and negative 4k. Now, again, what we're thinking is what can we divide out of these, right? What can we divide out? So around the answers are going to be negative 3, we have 4k, 2k, and negative 1. Again, notice this one's negative, so you factor out a negative. This one's negative, factor out a negative. This one's positive, factor out a positive, factor out a positive, right? Again, the square that's closest to the number, that's what sign you're going to factor out, okay? So then our final answer looks like this. 4k minus 3, 2k minus 1. Perfect. All right, one more example. This one is similar to that first example, okay? So go ahead, rewrite this, okay? Take 10 seconds, rewrite it. All right, so here's how it looks. It looks like 81m squared plus 0m. Again, we're filling in that placeholder. That we have 3. Okay, so now once you have that, I need you to go ahead and factor that, okay? Go ahead and factor this. Again, box and diamond, just like always, all right? Go ahead and do this now. Okay, so we have the box, we have the diamond, and we're going to put the first one in the first box. We're going to put the last one in the last box. Again, remembering that negative sign, 0m in the bottom of the diamond, and we're multiplying the first and the last. So we got negative 81m squared. Okay, again, we're thinking what two things multiply to 81m, except it's negative 81m squared, and then what add to 0? Well, let's think about this. They have to be the same number. One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative because it adds to 0. What multiplies to 81? Well, this is going to be 9m and negative 9m. 9m, negative 9m. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to factor this out now. So out of the bottom, it's going to be negative 1 because negative 1 and negative 9m have nothing in common. 81 and 9 have a 9 and an m in common. 81 and negative 9m. Oh, battery here. We better turn our brightness down just in case. Okay, so then 81m and 9m. This is going to be 9m, and then 9m and negative 1 is also going to give us positive 1, all right? So final answer should be 9m plus 1 and 9m minus 1. That right there is your final answer, all right? So now what we need to do is we need to start talking about these bottom ones right here, which is factoring using a greatest common factor, okay? Now, a greatest common factor, or a GCF, is basically when you are going to divide, pretty much, you're not going to do the box and diamond, but instead you're thinking, what can I divide out of both of these, okay? And so if you look here, pretty much what we're going to do is we're going to create a distributive problem. We've already talked about this, but again, we're kind of reviewing a little bit, okay? So looking at both of these, what could we divide out of both 8x and 12? And that is a 4, right? You could totally divide a 4 out of both these. Now, you could divide a 2 out of both these, but you want to do the biggest number. So then what we're going to do is we are going to create a distributive problem. And we're thinking 4 times what number should we put here in order to get 8x? All right, so this is going to be a 2x, right? Because 4 times 2x gives us 8x. Okay, then we can think, okay, 4 times what gives me negative 12? Well, this is a negative, so we know it's going to be negative. And then 4 times what gives us 12? We know it's going to be 3. That's our answer, right? You are creating a distributive problem. Like that is the goal. We are creating a distributive problem. Notice these ones are a little different than this, right? Because notice these ones have 3 terms normally, and if they do have 2 terms, they're missing that middle term, right? They're missing the middle term. So notice this one would technically be missing that like x squared term, right? We could just factor it out like this. Okay, if you look at this, well, again, if you were to rearrange this, this would technically be missing an m squared, right? Because you have your m and you have your not m, right? So again, instead think, what could you divide out of both these? All right, 40 and 100. What could you divide out of both these? And, well, you could divide out a 20, right? Both of them are divisible by 20. Now, if you would have said 2 or 5 or 10 or even 4, right? All of these are also true. However, we want the biggest one, right? So we're thinking 20, and then, again, 20 times what gives me 40? Well, 20 times 2, so we put a 2 there. Now we're thinking 20 times what gets me negative 100m? Well, this is going to be a negative 5m, right? And this is factored, right? And again, it's just a little bit of a shortcut. You're creating a distributive problem, right? Now, a lot of people are like, well, how do I know? How do I know when to do which one, all right? So first things first, always check the greatest common factor first, right? That's the biggest thing, all right? So if we look here, notice we could technically like put a plus 0 here, right? Because then you have 1, 2, 3. And you could factor the like normal way, right? With the box and diamond. However, it's much easier to just think, okay, is there something that we could divide out of both of these, right? So 12 and 16, is there something we could divide out? Well, you could divide a 4, because 12 is divisible by 4, and so is 16. And notice they also both have an x. So you could take out a 4x. Now we're thinking to ourselves, 4x times what is going to get me 12x squared? Well, this is going to be 3x, right? Because 4x times 3x is going to give us 12x squared. 4x times what is going to get me negative 16x? Well, we already have the x, so we don't need an x here. But we could do negative 4, right? Because 4x times negative 4 was going to give us negative 16x. And that's how we do it. So again, that is your answer. Now, again, speaking of like not knowing which one to do, you should just always try to factor out a GCF first. Very first thing, okay? So look at this problem right here. If, and okay, so don't write this down. Do not write this down, okay? We're going to do the box and diamond just like normal. Okay, so first one goes in the first box, last one goes in the last box, middle goes in the bottom of the diamond, and then we're going to multiply, so this is going to be 18n squared. Thinking what multiplies to 18n but adds to 9, this is going to be 6n and 3n, 6n and 3n, and now is where it gets to the fun part, okay? We could divide a 6 out of here. You could take out a 3n here. You could take a 3n here, and you could take a 3 out of that one. Now, look, this does not work. This actually breaks math. The reason why it breaks math is because, look, 6 times 3 is not 6, right? You could take out a 6 out of here, but then if you do that, then you can't have a 3 here, right? This would have to be a 1, right? And you could take out a 3n here, but then this one would have to be just a 1n, right? Now, that would work. However, it's kind of weird because you're not dividing the biggest thing out of it, all right? Now, technically, you could still do this, but it takes a lot of thought, all right? And so what we're going to do instead is we are going to make our lives a lot easier. So go ahead and get rid of all of that information. Again, you did not write that down. So what we're going to do to start off with is we're going to think, is there something we could divide all three of these by? Right off the bat. So 3n squared, 9n, and 6. Is there something we could divide all three by? And we could totally divide all of these by 3. Okay, so now create that distributed problem. 3 times what is going to get me 3n squared? Well, this has to be an n squared, right? Because 3 times n squared gives you 3n squared. Well, 3 times what gives me 9n? Well, this would be plus 3n. Because 3 times 3 is 9, and you have your n right there. And then last but not least, we have 3 times what gives me 6? Well, 3 times 2 gives you 6. So that right there is partially factored. Now, again, we want to factor completely, all right? And so notice, this is like step 1. Always factor out a greatest common factor first. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do a box and diamond. Okay, so you go ahead and draw your box, draw your diamond, and we're going to factor what is on the inside of these parentheses, all right? So that 3 stays there, okay? We just pay no attention to it, right? So you have n squared here. You're going to have 2 right there, 3n in the bottom, and then again you multiply this and that, the first and the last, so that's 2n squared. Perfect. Again, that is your setup. Pretty much you are ignoring this 3 out front. You're just factoring what is inside of the parentheses. So what multiplies to 2n squared but adds to 3n? Well, this is going to be 2n and 1n. That's the only combination. So 2n and 1n. Dividing out, you'll have a 2, an n, and a 1. Okay, again, I went through that a little quick, but you're just thinking, what could I divide out, right? What do they have in common? Now, when we write our answer, we have n plus 2 and n plus 1. However, we factored this chunk right here. So technically speaking, that is inside of the distributed problem. Now, this 3 right there, that's you have to keep it, right? When we are factoring, we are not creating or destroying any math. Instead, we are just manipulating it to look different. So this 3 still has to be there. Now, technically speaking, we don't need these parentheses because we've already created a couple different parentheses, all right? So our final answer would look like this. Keep your 3 out front. Then we have n plus 2, n plus 1. And that right there is our answer. All right, again, basically what we did was we created that distributive problem, and then we factored this right here, and that is that. Okay, I'm going to get rid of both those. But yeah, basically we factored just what was inside of our distributive property. All right, so go ahead and look at this problem, and I want you to create the distributive problem. All right, think, what can I divide out of all 3 of those? Go ahead and do this now. Okay, so then we could divide a 5 out of these, right? Because 5, 15, and 20, well, you could totally divide a 5 out of all this, right? So you're thinking 5 times what gives you x squared? Well, that would be x squared. 5 times 3x would give us 15. And then 5 times negative 4 would get us negative 20. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're factoring this chunk right here. So I'm going to go ahead and do the setup real quick. So we have the setup, box and diamond. First one goes in the first box. Last one goes in the last box. Middle goes in the bottom of the diamond. And again, last but not least, multiplying our first and our third. Okay, now what I want you to do, I want you to take over, and I want you to think, what does multiply to negative 4x squared but adds to 3x, okay? Figure that out, put that in the corners, go ahead and factor this right now, and we'll come back when you are finished. All right, so what things do multiply to that negative 4x squared but add to 3? This is going to be 4x and negative 1x. Put those corners in the corners, so 4x, negative 1x, and then we can divide out, right? So you got a 4, an x, and a negative 1. Again, you could divide out a 4 here, an x, and then this one, nothing's in common, so it's a 1. However, this spot's negative, so you put a negative. Our answer then, we keep the 5, right? And then we can put our x minus 1, x plus 4. But we don't need those parentheses, and we want to make sure that the 5 is just out front. So we have 5 times x minus 1 times x plus 4. That right there is our answer. Okay, so there are, I think you can do this one by yourself. Big thing to note is you can divide out a variable as well, right? So think, what can you divide out? Maybe a number, maybe a variable as well, okay? So go ahead, take a second, figure out what you can divide out. Okay, so we could divide out a 3 and an x, right? If you take out a 3 and an x, well, this is going to be x squared. This is going to be negative 2x, and 3 divided by 45 is going to be negative 15. Again, big thing, we've never dealt with an x to the third, x squared and then an x, right? It's always x squared, then x, then no x. So make sure if you ever see something like this, you can divide that x out, right? That's probably what's going to happen in the problem. So then what we're going to do is we are going to factor just like normal. So go ahead and take about, I don't know, a minute or two, factor this, and come back when you're finished. All right, so here we go. Here's the box. Again, you're probably getting tired of this box, but remember, the more you do this, the better at factoring you're going to get. And the better at factoring you're going to get, the easier your life in math, or in algebra anyway, becomes, all right? I'm just going to tell you that right now. The better you are at this, the better you're going to have in general, okay? So that is the setup. Let's think, what multiplies to negative 15x squared but adds to 2x? Well, this is going to be negative 5x and positive 3x. Again, use your factor chart if you can, right? So you put your corners in your corners, and we divide out. So negative 5x, x, and 3. Again, this one's negative, so we pull out a negative. This one's positive, pull out a positive. That's how we know. All right, so then again, we're writing out our answer. So we have 3. And again, we are rewriting this trinomial right here as the product of these two binomials. So we have x minus 5, x plus 3. However, we don't need that second set of parentheses, and so our final answer is 3x. Oops, I missed that on that one. And then this is multiplied x minus 5, x plus 3. So yeah, on this work right here, you should get rid of that 3, and you make sure you have a 3x, right? Again, that 3x just kind of stays out front. Once you factor something to the front, you just literally keep it there. Sound good? All right. We have a couple more examples, but they are not too terrible, I don't think. I think you're going to be all right. So there's 3 of them, okay? I'm going to do this one speedy. Well, actually, I'm going to do this one kind of together, and then I'm going to let you guys do those bottom 2, and we'll do them really fast, okay? So this one right here, again, you're thinking, what can you divide out of both these? Well, you see a 2 and a 50. You can divide both these by 2. Creating that distributive problem, this would be x squared minus 25. Now, again, you may be like, oh, well, we divided out of 2. We factored it. Great. But remember, you could potentially factor this right here inside. Let's put a placeholder and see. So we're going to have our 2. Then we have x squared plus 0x minus 25. I should totally make this orange just to stay current. Boom, there you go. Again, that inside we just added that placeholder, and that way we can do the box and diamond potentially. So we draw a box, we draw a diamond, and again, just like normal, first one goes in the first box, last one goes in the last box, middle one goes in the bottom of the diamond, and you're going to multiply the first and the last. Again, ignoring that 2 out front. Okay, now what 2 things multiply to negative 25 but add to 0? Well, they have to be the same, so it's going to be 5 and 5. Except one's going to be negative, one's going to be positive. So we have 5x, negative 5x. And going around the outside, you have 5, an x, and a negative 5. Perfect. Okay, so then we can go ahead and redo this as 2, and then in parentheses, we have our x plus 5 and our x minus 5. So we could actually factor this and make it look even better. All right, final answer, 2 hangs out front. We have x plus 5 multiplied by x minus 5. That right there is our answer. Cool. All right, so there are 2 problems right there. Go ahead, take about, I don't know, 5 minutes or so. Just take these 2 problems seriously, try to do them, and we will go through them speedy in a bit. All right, so zooming in on this problem right here, the very first thing you got to do is you got to think, can I divide anything? And absolutely, you could divide a y, right? That y is in all 3 problems, and so we can get rid of it, okay? That would leave us with an x squared minus 3x minus 10. Again, think about creating that distributive property, right? Y times 3x, or times negative 3x would be negative 3xy, right? That's how it works, okay? So then we're going to go ahead and do our box and diamond. Draw a nice box, draw a nice diamond. Again, ignoring that y up front, right? So we have x squared, negative 10, we got negative 3x, and then again multiply first and the last to make negative 10x squared. All right, now we're thinking what multiplies to negative 10? Well, 5 and 2, right? So we're going to make a 5x, a 2x. However, one of them has to be negative because it's negative 3, the 5. So boom, that's how you kind of do that. So we got negative 5x, 2x. Thinking about dividing out, we got negative 5, x, and 2. You're probably getting to the point where you see, hey, if there's just an x squared, it's literally just these numbers, right? 2 and negative 5, right? So maybe keep in mind that shortcut, right? But anyway, your final answer then, well, I suppose we could write this first. So you have your y, and we're going to factor this as x minus 5 and x plus 2. But then your final answer would be a y out front, x minus 5, x plus 2. And again, that is factored completely. What it means to be factored completely is that all of these parts right here, there's nothing you could divide out of any of them, okay? So then our last one, this one is a challenge. Notice, again, we do not deal with x to the thirds, so most likely you can divide out. And in this case, we can take out a 7 and an x, right? So 7x times x squared would get us our 7x to the third. And then 7x times what gives us negative 28x? This is going to be negative 4, right? So now this one, again, we might need a placeholder, right? So we have 7x. Oop, I should make that a little bigger. So we have x squared plus 0x minus 4. Again, this is it's going to give us a placeholder for somewhere to do those 3, right? We need to have 3, right? X squared, x, no x, right? So go ahead and draw the box. Draw the diamond. First one goes in the first box. Last one goes in the last box. Middle goes in the bottom of the diamond. And we're going to multiply the first and the last. Okay, what multiplies negative 4x squared but adds to 0? This is going to be 2x and negative 2x. Put those corners in the corners, and we're going to divide out. There we go. And so then our final answer, we have, well, not final yet. We have our 7x, and then we have x minus 2, x plus 2. And so then our final answer, we don't need that second set of parentheses, right? So we have 7x multiplied by x minus 2, x plus 2. And that's it. All right, so again, lots of factoring today. Hopefully you did okay with the video. By now, again, you should be pretty darn good at factoring, okay? Like we did it, I don't know, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We did it 13 times for just the box and diamond, right? And then we did a little bit of this as well. So we did a lot of factoring today. So, yeah, best of luck to you. If you have questions, remember to email me. Talk to you in the next one.